So my name is Alexandra Medeiros. I am going to be performing Wach HAYDN by Mikhail Johnson, with whom I am speaking today. So Mikhail, I have a couple questions about you as a composer before we get into the piece. So my first question is, what drew you to composition originally, as opposed to only performance?
That's a very interesting term, because mostly everything was performance driven. I was in high school band, playing saxophone, and piano was basically on the side, and I was learning all this repertoire. But then we had to do these exams in our senior year of high school. And those were a similar version to what you would call the SATs in the United States. Mm-hmm. We call them the CXCs. And I did the music version of that. And one of the requirements was we had to compose 3 contrasting pieces. Mm. And it was through that I sort of discovered my ability to compose, although a lot of what I did back then was almost like a carbon copy of the people I studied at the time, which were like Mozart and and Beethoven and a couple others. And then I kind of tried my attempt at throwing some jazz in there, for dramatic effect. But it's through that seed that I was able to really think that there's a possibility that I could actually write music. So from there, it really just developed very slowly. But when I got into college, during that time I was doing science, but I was having my minor in music. There was a teacher there, Andrew Marshall, who is a very fantastic choral composer, who really kind of like threw me into the deep. And it was his works that really inspired me to like jump in and make that happen. So thankfully he was able to really nurture that in full effect.
That kind of leads me to my next today. Yeah, that kind of leads me to my next question. Who or what are some of your compositional inspirations?
Compositional inspirations. First one is Brahms. Brahms is my all-time favorite because he's a rhythmic guru. He's someone who just he's very thick in his textures, but are very unique. But his rhythm is what stands out to me, his ability to really juxtapose that. And I found that as a very neat way to incorporate that in my style, in terms of the fact that I'm a Jamaican, and a lot of the Jamaican heritage that I'm trying to evoke relies heavily on rhythm in that respect. So, that's one of them. Others include Sebastian Courier, Thomas Addis, Lowell Lieberman, David Bruce. A lot of them are pretty much here. Brian Neighbors. Yeah, there are lots that inspire me. But if we were gonna talk about someone who's no longer with us, I would say Brahms and George Walker. I would add to that.
That's interesting that you said that. I about a year ago, before COVID hit, was conducting Lyric for Strings by George Walker, a beautiful piece. So that's very interesting that you mentioned that. So this is a question that, as a composer and pianist myself, I'm always a little curious. Do you consider yourself more a pianist, composer, or some sort of balance of both? And then I have a follow-up question.
I would say I'm going to stick with pianist composer, in the sense that I was a pianist first, and I gradually became a composer. It's interesting though that my career as a composer seems to have taken over, even though I'm still pursuing piano as even up to the terminal degree. But I definitely enjoy the art of performing. I do enjoy the art of composing as well. So I definitely say pianist composer.
Mm. And what do you enjoy about each, about being a pianist and being a composer, and what frustrates you about both?
About being a pianist, the joy of being able to share musical ideas, share musical contexts with audiences, being able to, well, for me, my goal in performance is about having the audience discover something. At the end of the concert, I want them to say, "Oh, I never heard this piece before. I absolutely love this. This needs to be on my playlist." So, wanting to perform works that are underrepresented, works that are not, often heard, works from, people who look like me and are composed by me. It's very important, to have your audience discover all the time. So that's for the pianist aspect. As a composer, being able to create the stuff you want to hear. um, so it's really a blessing to be able to do both and to engage in both of those worlds where you'd want to have the performer who you're writing for engage in a different world that in your mind you've never heard or you'd want to hear, and at the same time, having an extension of you from the performer aspect leading into a composer aspect, kind of merge the two. And the frustrations as a pianist is not being, it's almost like the anxiety of not being at your best. You always want to put your best foot forward, and sometimes, especially, it becomes a little more anxious just because you kind of feel as though as a person of color there is a little more of a microscope over you. That's pretty much how I feel. But apart from that, when I get the opportunity, I just dive in head first. As a composer, for me it's a grand opportunity, to be able to write the music, but it's frustrating when it's not coming to you when you need it. And I'm thankful when you're able to, like this piece, to be able to pull it out really fast. And in other cases, like the piece that came after while COVID hit, it took me 8 months to even write a note. And those are the things that gets frustrating, because it's like you are inspired to an extent, but you're like, where do you begin? But once you get going, it becomes very fruitful. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But so with everything.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to both of those frustrations and enjoyments in both piano and composition. Another question I have, kind of tying into your identity, and this I'm saying, I'm asking as a woman of color myself, is do you feel any pressure of your racial or ethnic identity in your music, or do you feel it's more organic? Like what you're composing is what you want to be composing, or what you feel in a way that you should be composing?
I am thankful that I have been commissioned in a way that gives me autonomy on what I want to write. And I think a lot of it has stemmed from the fact that when I did composition, I was doing a lot of passion projects. So I was writing pieces that I was very interested in. For example, writing modern music for period instruments. So I wrote a piece for 2 harpsichords, thinking about writing something for recorders, and the like. And at the same time, I was thinking of writing art songs that involved the Jamaican vernacular, the Jamaican patois, a lot of the rhythms and stuff. So having that seed being passion projects of mine in the very beginning, before I even got any commissions, that not only allowed me to find my own voice. So when I did get commissions, I knew exactly what I wanted to dive into. And it was more of me challenging the performers than the other. And in turn, it became a symbiotic relationship where their instrumentation challenged me in how can I make this enjoyable for the performer, yet they're in a world where they're learning something new. So it's absolutely a blessing for me to be able to write what I want.
That's awesome. So this kind of leads me now into the piece, Wach HAYDN, and I hope that I am pronouncing that correctly. For those who are unfamiliar with the piece, I know it was written this past year, but could you briefly explain the name and its significance?
Okay, so this piece, Wach HAYDN, it's written in the Patois language, with the exception of Haydn, who is the name of the composer, but it is a double entendre. And the first meaning is, in the Jamaican vernacular, it means, what are you hiding? So it means, what are you hiding? Or it could mean, look here, Haydn. So watcha means to watch here. So those two meanings, meaning what are you hiding, in terms of like the journey of hide and seek. So I create these formulaic things of what Haydn does in terms of taking fragments or melodic material and kind of expanding them or shortening them to create new materials, accompaniments, new melodic figurations. And eventually out of that is the journey of, frustration of, oh, you think you're gonna hear it again, but you don't. Well, you hear it later again. It's almost like when you're searching for something and you kind of go back to the familiar places just to see if you missed anything. And then as it builds up, then the quote, which is what the piece is inspired by, is the item in which you're looking for. So it's not until the end where it resembles, hey, I found it. And then, just like with any hide and seek, the whole game is over. And on the other side of it, where it means to look here, Haydn, it's my parody of saying, look at what I can do. It's my version of, Mozart towards Salieri, that kind of poking fun of, look at me, I'm this great composer. So yeah, that's basically the inspiration towards that title.
Well, I think it's brilliant. As someone now who has been learning it, it's you can definitely see both of those readings in the title, expanded upon throughout the piece. And
Thank you so much.
Of course, and the ending is definitely, it's brilliant. And when it comes, you feel finally like there's some sort of resolution, almost. But not quite enough, almost like
not quite enough, because it's just like it's done.
Right. It's very reminiscent of the joke in Haydn's joke anyway, right? So it's very like, it is a lot of playing with Haydn. I know that this piece was inspired by the Sonata in D major. Did you choose to pair it yourself, or was this a part of the commission? And if you did choose this piece, why?
This was actually given to me as a part of the commission, and this was commissioned by Bowling Green State University for a dear colleague of mine, Abigail Macer, who was doing like a test run with Jonathan Oliveira on creating contemporary works for students being introduced, for college students, early college students being introduced to new music, and how we can make it in a way accessible, being paired with works that they're currently working on. So something, or works that are staples in the repertoire, should I say. So in this respect, this is a very famous Haydn sonata for someone starting out, even, learning a work like this at the collegiate level. And so to have that work paired with a contemporary work that uses a lot of the formulaic ideas of what they're familiar with would make it accessible for them to kind of realize patterns and sequences, and that familiarity will allow them to enjoy the process of learning contemporary work, to kind of just ease the edge, off of contemporary music being something that's a tragic, hard work. It can easily be fun as well and accessible. So.
Wow, absolutely. And
that's my process for that.
Yeah, and knowing that, it helps explain the piece a little bit more too. And hopefully when people are listening to it, they can recognize those similarities. Speaking of the similarities between the two pieces, what, as you were listening to again, Haydn's Sonata in D major, what was speaking out to you, and what did you want to, pull out of that piece, and why did you choose those motifs and, progressions in the piece?
I didn't want to overwhelm myself with the possibilities that Haydn had presented to me. But the beginning of the piece, not only is it so iconic, but the opening material, but a lot of it in retrospect is it's very rhythmic, and pulling piece of it would give me the rhythmic material that I was looking for, that allow me to create not only flowing sections but also very driving sections. And it gives me a very nice starting point in which to create something that I knew further down in the piece would be a kind of pivotal point to kind of brew this this quotation to fruition. So a lot of that material would be almost like, I was like, okay, what if I took this? What would Haydn do? That was the kind of thing. And Haydn is known for his humor of like taking one small thing and just creating an entire accompaniment line out of it, and these and other things. So it's just like taking something that's simple as the opening quote and say, what can I really do with this in the style of Haydn?
And what would you say your musical choices in that regard, in terms of that specific motif? How does that tie into the narrative introduced by the title in the whole piece itself?
Back to the parody of, look at what I can do. Yeah. It's very interesting to be like using something that has harmonic context and kind of dismantling that, and juxtaposing it to modern era where you're like, okay, two different tonalities, two different types of motives, creating something that I could hear as even orchestral, something whimsical, even more so like my interpretation of whimsical, but I don't know, just kind of amplifying that playful nature of Haydn, because I think in a sense, there are a lot of ways in which Haydn is kind of presented in a very serious way, even though inertly it's composed very playful. We tend to approach it very seriously. And I think the way I wanted to compose this work was a way that would allow the performer to not see it as something serious, but something as you could play around with it. I wanted to formulate an interpretation. I wanted to have a vision of what that might mean for you. And I think that's the danger of my pieces somehow, because I feel like because it's modern and because I give a tempo indication and because I give all these dynamic markings, that they would follow them a little too literal and not allow the music to speak to them. And I think that's the trap that falls into it, because when I hear someone plays it exactly, strictly in time, no liberties and so on, it becomes a little, I'm just like, no, that's not really what I was looking for. But at the same time, just as how you would treat a Haydn piece with the kind of idea of interpretation, give and take, and nuance and depth and breadth, I really want you to kind of find your depth and breadth and nuance in this as well. So I'm hoping that would be give you a good answer to the question. But taking that material and having that be the focal point of how can you as a living composer breathe life into something new for the performer to also kind of do the same.
Well, as the performer of the piece, I love to hear that you appreciate the freedom of the performer themselves as well. I think we have this generally have this assumption of composers, whether they're still alive or dead, that what is written is what should be played as it was written, right? And that does get us into this unfortunate trap where the performer loses a lot of their own autonomy over what is how they read the piece. And so hearing that from you makes me feel a lot more comfortable with being able to take the piece where it speaks to me. So thank you for that. And my last question for you is kind of similar, related to that. Do you have any advice for someone trying to play your piece? And what are you looking forward to in its performance?
I'm looking forward to discovering myself. uh, what it's like the from the audience. It's nerve-wracking as a composer to let your child out into the world to kind of have a life of its own. But at the same time, it's very inspiring because it's a new work out there for people to discover, and I want people to have an imagination. I think when people perform my works, I want them to just have an imagination, not be afraid to take risks. And if you see something new, if you see something that speaks to you, just jump on it. Because for some reason, I might think of something one way, but then, and that's the joy of having performers played so often, you get to discover so many new things about your piece that someone was just like, and I never thought of bringing that out, or never thought of taking these decisions, interpretive decisions. So I just want people who perform my works to dig deep and not be afraid to take risks and be innovative. And at the same time, I want the audience to just enjoy the ride.
Well, thank you so much for answering some of my questions. Now, I just wanted to open it up to you if you had any questions for me as the person who will be, taking hold of your baby for this performance.
I first of all, thank you so much for that opportunity of performing this work. I'm forever grateful for that, and I would be very much interested to know how did you feel in terms of when you first listened to the piece or when you first started reading it. What was your thought process in not only learning but also in formulating your interpretation and just your ideas that came to mind in terms of how your interpretation was going to manifest itself for this performance?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. When I learn a new piece, I like to listen to it in conjunction with the music itself. So I had the score and your recording of it in front of me, and as I was listening, I was keeping track of things that I was noticing, making mental pictures of how I was feeling and what is the music inspiring in me, and now having learned it too, it does very much feel like a dance and a song. It has these moments that are very rhythmic, very very quick, and moments that are very very beautiful. Not to say that the rhythmic moments are not beautiful as well, but the contrast is very clear, and I think that's where it differs from Haydn. As I learned it, I tried not to listen to Haydn, and then only recently started listening to the original and was now making note again of all of the similarities, the quotation at the end, how it differs. And I think there's a real joy in listening to a piece or making your own interpretation of it, without the rest of this context. And then now bringing that in, as it has honestly expanded my narrative that I've written for the piece myself, because it's a very complex piece in terms of what you are trying to say, and I think the repetition within it, which hopefully will be very noticeable to the audience, but how it changes here and there is as a composer, I'm like, yes, a great way to write a lot of music without necessarily coming up with a lot of different ideas, but you take those core ideas that you have within the piece and you somehow string them all together in a way that makes sense, which is a really really hard thing to do. As a composer myself, I can recognize that, and as I've been learning it, it's been truly a joy to be constantly learning something new every time I sit down to the piano. And another thing that I would say too is, as a woman of color, as a person of color, I love to perform pieces by people who look like me and who um, and fortunately are still alive too. And so this is an incredible
Yes.
opportunity for me to be, not only learning this piece, but having this conversation with you to get into your mind, because it's so rare, as a, performer, that we actually get to interact with the people who are writing these pieces, and typically the, piano canon, we're playing Mozart and Beethoven and Bach, and they're no longer here. So we're doing our best
Yeah.
to interpret what we have. But being able to speak to you about it too, it helps me to get a better idea of what was going on in your head as you were writing it, and what am I bringing to the table, in terms of my interpretation of the piece, and how does that coincide with what you came up with, but also maybe contradict a little bit.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to do my very, very best to do it justice. So I really appreciate your taking this time. If you have any other questions for me, please let me know.
That's pretty much it.
Well,
But thank you so much for doing this, and I'm looking forward to the performance. And I'm hoping those who are listening will definitely enjoy.
yes, me too. Well, thank you so much, Mikhail, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.